When I was growing up, everyone was a bowler. My mom was always bowling in a league somewhere or another. My parents met in a bowling alley bar. My dad used to work for Brunswick, managing bowling alleys and running tournaments. And that's how eventually my family moved to Bremerton. Of all things, bowling brought us here. And there were a lot of bowling alleys around back then. West Park Lanes, Bay Bowl, Highjoy, All Star, Strike Zone, and I spent time growing up in every single one of them. In the playrooms at first, occasionally coming out to see my mom bowl. She always had these little bean bags in her kit. They were powdery and soft. She let me play with them. And eventually, I outgrew the playrooms, and my mom enrolled me in a junior league. I can still hear that resounding thump of a ball hitting a lane, rolling, the crash of the pins. The smell of just dirty fast food, like hot, salty French fries in the air, mixing with the scent of the oil on the lanes, back when bowling lanes had to be oiled. There is an old, dirty iron-on patch pinned to the corkboard next to me. It says, Yabba 120 game. Yeah, baby. I never quite reached the heights that my folks did. My dad has at least 2 perfect game rings, 300 rings, and a clock. I don't think my mom ever reached the prized 300 game, but she got close, and she got close at Bay Bowl. So yeah, I get super nostalgic about bowling alleys. I drove by Bay Bowl last week and was struck by the condition it's in right now. It's gone through an interesting metamorphosis in the last 20 years, and it seems like she's taking her last breath as living art covered in graffiti. Is there a word for feeling that something is both beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time? All right, Google will have me. Hold on. All right, poignant? No. Bittersweet? Bittersweet is pretty close. Oh, look at this. This is a Portuguese word? How do I say this? Saudade. Saudade. This blog post describes the feeling exactly. The word doesn't have an exact English translation, but is described as the love that remains when someone is gone. It describes a deep nostalgic longing, implicit in which is the fact that the object of the longing will never return. Portuguese. Saudade, word of the day, everybody. So, Bay Bowl is a beautiful old building that is a part of not just my history, but the history of our town. And I want to take one good, long, last look at her before she goes. For anyone who's not sure what building I'm talking about, Bay Bowl is a huge brick building on Lower Wheaton Way, kind of between Harrison Hospital and the YMCA. It used to have a unique shaped marquee on the front that said Bay in these big red neon letters, and that's the first hint to the building's origin. It started out life as a movie theater during World War II, while the population in town was booming. It was built by the federal government sometime between 1943 and 1945. Movie theaters were on the rise, and they often showed newsreels alongside movies. Of course, it's worth noting that theaters built by the government during wartime were also a powerful tool for propaganda. There was even a government office for it, the Office of War Information, They had a complicated relationship with Hollywood and the Motion Picture Bureau. This included encouraging the negative portrayal of Nazis and people we were at war with during World War II, and encouraging heroic depictions of soldiers and sailors at war. They sometimes included informational bits about, coping with death and loss of a loved one. Can you imagine getting your grief counseling from the government in a 10-minute short in a movie theater? Yee. There is a quote on the wiki that came from a book. Here it is. Quote, "From a mixture of patriotism and the profit motive, Hollywood became a compliant part of the American war machine." End quote. And that book is called Hollywood Goes to War: How Politics, Profits, and Propaganda Shaped World War II Movies, by Gregory Black and Clayton Copes. I'll put a link in the show notes. I don't know how to say that last name. But it is interesting to think about the blend of news and movies and propaganda, and to think about how it might have been received by the people who frequented the Bay Theater. After all, these aren't sort of everyday people. We're talking about sailors and shipyard workers. There is no hiding the brutality of war from the people who are repairing the burned out hulls of bombed ships and the men who are fighting the battles out at sea. World War II ended in 1945, and men started returning home from the war. Theater attendance reached an all-time high in 1946, but with a boom, always comes a bust. Theater attendance started to fall in 1947, and by 1953, average attendance was half of what it had been in 46. Movie theaters started closing all over the country, including the Bay Theater. Bay Theater closed in 1953, and the federal government sold the property to the city of Bremerton. A gentleman named Forrest Molnix purchased Babel from the city of Bremerton in 1954. I've seen some conflicting reports here. Some say that the city of Bremerton decided to convert Bay Theater into into a bowling alley. But there's also a lovely article from the Kitsap Sun that details more of Forrest Molnix's history with bowling alleys. It says he opened his first bowling alley in 1948, and that it was under the City Hall on 4th Street, and it had 6 lanes. After 2 years of great success there, he relocated and expanded up to 8 lanes, and this second location was called Mole's Rialto Bowl. And that name made me pause, because there used to be a movie theater downtown called the Rialto. I wonder if Babel was not his first theater-turned-bowling alley project. I would have to verify that, though. I don't know. The article does say 2 blocks away, so 2 blocks away from 4th Street. I mean, depending on where that City Hall was, it would be about the right location for the Rialto Theater. So Forrest Molnix and family remodel the Bay Theater themselves into Babel and expand from 8 lanes to 10. They went on to add the southeast wing to the building with 10 new lanes in 1960, and the business stays in the family for at least 3 generations. Babel operates for close to 50 years. In that 1996 article, quote, Fern Kabalak recalls bowling at Bay in the early 60s. Back then, there was no air conditioning, so in the summer they would open the doors to let the air circulate, and we could watch the Warren Avenue Bridge being built, she said. God, could you imagine that view? Babel closed its lanes in May of 2002 and has been slowly declining ever since. At some point, the lanes were removed, and the southeast wing, which is like that long, low, flat part of the building with the parking lot, it was converted for storage. A portion of Babel reopened as a Thai restaurant during the 2010s. I remember this happening because when they moved in, they exposed the original theater facade, which I had never seen before. It had been blocked up my entire life. And then they opened it up and it was just like, God, look at her. It looked just like an old movie theater with the insets for the posters and the way that it turned and framed in towards the doors. It looked just like an old movie theater. And I was like, how did I miss that my entire life? The marquee came down, the iconic red neon bay letters were removed and sold to a private collector in 2016 for about $800. Around that time, a photographer named Kevin Hong, he documents Golden Age bowling alleys. He was allowed to come in and photograph what was left inside of Bay Bowl. The project is called Maple Plus Pine, and he keeps the photos on his Facebook, it looks like. There are some very nice pictures of the inside of Bay Bowl. Most recently, as in 2022, Bay Bowl made a cameo in a music video that was shown at the West Sound Film Festival. I'll put a link to that down below too. Bay Bowl does, of course, have a gorgeous view of the bay, as Miss Cadillac stated in that article, and that will be its demise. A Seattle development company has bought it. They intend to tear her down and build a giant wall of glass waterfront condos there. Their website lists a start date of July 2022, but demolition hasn't happened yet. The development is approved by the city, but not all the permits are in place. It might be worth noting that the same company also had purchased land at 1943 Wheaton Way, which is just up the hill towards the Y, and that land was headed for foreclosure in May of this year, according to an article published in the Seattle Daily Journal of Commerce in January. So the article is published in January saying that without change, that other Wheaton Way property would go for foreclosure in May of this year. And I don't know if that actually happened. I mean, I'm not a real estate developer. I don't really know how any of this stuff works. But they're still holding on to Bay Bowl, so she languishes on the precipice of destruction for another day. If you want to go see her, do it now. Stand on the hill beside her. Watch the sunset over the Warren Avenue Bridge if you can see it through the overgrown brush. Soon that view will be gone, replaced by another giant wall of condos. Do you have a question about Bremerton or its history? I want to hear it. You can find the show on social media at Bremelore, or visit the website www.bremelore.wtf. That's right, you heard me. Bremelore.whiskey tango foxtrot to leave me a voice message. I can't wait to hear from you.